Hello everybody, welcome to Oscar Bucket. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already and drop a like on this video. It only takes 1 second and makes a massive difference on how the video performs in the YouTube algorithm. Also go check out episode 4 of my Spurs My NBA. That is out now and I'm really enjoying that series. The people who are watching it are really enjoying that series. So maybe you would really enjoy the series. But with that said, it's hot takes. Let's get into it. Steve Kerr has always been a mid coach. You know, I don't know that it's necessarily fair to say that Steve Kerr is a mid coach, but I definitely do think there is an argument to be made. He is overrated. I do think he was I think there was some sort of official NBA thing that basically put him on the Mount Rushmore of NBA coaches, or top 5 or something like that. Mount Rushmore just means top 4, but we wanted to say it in a cooler way. And he's definitely not that. There are a couple of coaches throughout history that I definitely think deserve a little bit more praise than Steve Kerr. He still was a very pivotal part of the Warriors becoming what they did. I do not agree with the notion that the Warriors were going to be the Warriors with or without Steve Kerr. Maybe they would have been eventually, but not as early as they did, I don't think. It really took a coach who understood the value of what Steph and Clay could bring as a shooting backcourt, because a lot of other coaches, basically every other coach in the league, rather than embracing that, would stifle it and make them be players that they were not and probably hold them back. And you can make the argument that, all he really did was not be a negative, but based on the perception of three-pointers at the time, being a negative in that particular department was a fairly common practice. Even if there were coaches who were good with three-pointers and even were in favor of them being taken, there really weren't that many in favor of them being taken at the volume that the Warriors did and would grow to take even more so in the future. So he deserves credit for that. And I still think he's a good coach. Just a lot of blind spots and annoying stuff, especially in regards to playing young dudes. Julius Randle is the single worst All-NBA player ever. Well, let me introduce you to this really cool player called DeAndre Jordan, who made All-NBA first team because the center position was remarkably weak, and he did that while being pretty good for sure, a good defender and a really great lob target and rebounder, but essentially they gave All-NBA first team to more athletic Clint Capella. And Julius Randle, overrated by maybe that mark in the league by making an All-NBA team, but worst All-NBA player? Hell no. Darius Garland has MVP potential. I definitely think there's a lot of Steve Nash in Darius Garland, and I think there's an argument to be made under the right circumstances. You could see a similar type of rise, although I also think people in the modern context are so critical of those Steve Nash MVPs that perhaps they wouldn't really allow something like that to happen again. I also don't think that Darius really has the wiring to be a high volume scorer. He can average a crazy efficient 21 to 23, but Darius is not going to be getting anywhere near the 30 point per game mark, at least, unless he completely changes his approach to the game. He definitely has a more conservative, cool and collected approach, and he is awesome. Don't get me wrong, I think I said the other day Darius is probably a top 10 most skilled offensive player, if not that, at least top 15, but he's also small and he also isn't the most aggressive player that there's ever been, and that's fine. It's a very good play style and a very effective play style, and I think Darius Garland is very good and very underrated. But MVP level, that's a bit of a stretch, and it would require a very specific set of circumstances to go down for him to get into that realm. So I'm going to go with a no on that. NBA champions are not world champions. It does not matter if the best players are there. That is not how it works. All Americans that think otherwise should get their head out of their ass. So this is a topic that's been discussed that I find pretty silly on both sides of the equation. On the one hand, non-Americans who think that it's pretty dumb to call it world championships, I do agree with that notion. I also think the point of view of, sure, it's not a world championship because it's basically just America plus one Canadian team. At the same time, it is the best players in the world, and the Denver Nuggets would beat every other basketball team that exists in every other country, for sure. As much as we can speculate on that being true, and as confident as I am that that is true, it also isn't what happened. So you can't just go based on like, yes, this technically is the best team in the world. It's like, okay, but it didn't compete with the world. You can't just say that and be done with it. At the same time, I also think this, like, who gives a shit? Like the semantics of whether or not it's the world championship or the American championship, whatever. Does it really matter that much? I feel like people get really bent out of shape over this, and it's really fairly inconsequential. America is the best at basketball. It just is. It just simply is. The only reason that they lose the FIBA World Cup or in the Olympics is because the best basketball players don't play for those teams anymore. But if America rolled out its 10 to 15 best players in the NBA every single year, 10 to 15 best American-born players, it would be slaughter every single time. I don't care. World championships, it's kind of dumb. I agree with that. I will also say Americans are very arrogant and egotistical, and it's kind of ingrained in the culture to be that way. Very individualistic, always talking about how it's the greatest country on earth and all that shit. I have no patriotism, no pride for my country whatsoever. No, I will not leave it, for those of you who might comment that, because it does happen. But America, like, just, I'm looking at this as objectively as I can. This is the place where the best basketball players play. The NBA is the best basketball league in the world. And while other leagues have made huge strides to getting closer to being as good as the NBA, they are still decidedly not. Either way, though, I think this is dumb semantics, and it's really not that big of a deal. And if you want to attack American arrogance or egoism, there are probably a lot better examples than this. It's probably something that people are saying without much thought behind it. So yeah. Prime Dwyane Wade is better than prime Kobe. I've seen this argument be made a couple of times, and I don't think it's like, a dumb point of view for sure. I definitely think there's an argument to be made that they peaked pretty similarly. I think Dwyane Wade was utilized as a playmaker more, but I don't think that necessarily means he was like that much better of a playmaker. Also, he utilized more as a slasher, but I don't think he was like so much better of a slasher than Kobe was. Kobe is also an all-time great slasher, although I think Dwyane Wade is the best guard slasher that there has ever been by a quite substantial margin. But really, the only significant distinction between these two as players in terms of their actual ability is that Kobe was just a better jump shooter from everywhere on the floor. Even looking at their mid-range percentages throughout their careers, Kobe regularly was, 3 to 4 to 5% better in the different spots from mid-range, and of course, a much better three-point shooter. His percentage was never that amazing, but he was much better than Dwyane Wade's, much higher volume than Dwyane Wade, and the reason his percentage was low wasn't because he couldn't hit threes, but because he would take wild-ass threes all the time because, it's Kobe. What else do you expect? I think Kobe gets the slight edge because he's a better jump shooter, but it's definitely close when we're talking about peak for peak. Dwyane Wade has an amazing peak, and I think it's a pretty underrated one at that, just because it was much more short-lived than Kobe Bryant's peak was. The Dallas Mavericks will make the finals. I don't know how to tell you this, man, but you have to play defense to make the finals unless you just get an absolute cupcake matchup every way. There is not a fucking shot that the Dallas Mavericks could stop a Denver Nuggets offense even a little bit. And while, Dallas can score quite a bit too, if you're going to run into a team that's great on defense and great on offense, like the Denver Nuggets are, they're fucked. You can't just be great on one end of the floor. And even then, the offense, when Kyrie and Luka played together, wasn't that great. I think there's a very real chance that it will be great offense, but it's just too one-sided. It just simply is. I really like Kyrie and Luka together, but they need to put more defensive options around them before I'm calling them a contender, let alone the team that would win the West. Nikola Jokic is on track to surpass Michael Jordan. A lot has to happen, but the path is there. I guess the point of view of like, technically he's achieved a shit ton at a really young age and he could play for another 10 years and achieve a shit ton in that time. But Michael Jordan achieved such a crazy amount in such a short amount of time that to replicate that kind of dominance over a decade, pretty rare, pretty much impossible to be replicated. And, you know, I think Jokic also, as much as he is a much better defender than a lot of people gave him credit for, as proved by the playoffs, still, he's not as good as a defender as Michael Jordan was. You know, when we're talking about like top players of all time, guys who are in the top 10, it's very rare to find a guy who is, you know, pretty single-sided or like good defender and great offensive player. It's usually great offensive player, great defensive player. There are exceptions like Magic Johnson, great offensive player, whatever defensive player. Bill Russell, great defensive player, whatever offensive player. But if you don't got both of them, it's really hard. I do think his all-time numbers will be ridiculous. He's probably going to be top 10 in points, rebounds, and assists. He's probably going to win multiple championships and multiple MVPs. Definitely, I think Jokic could be top 10 all time, but going for number one, it's a very, very ridiculous feat. And sure, maybe the path exists, but it's a very fucking difficult path to go down. So I don't think there's no legitimacy to this point of view, but it's a stretch to be sure, just because MJ and LeBron just set a level for the GOAT status that's really, 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 really high and really hard to achieve. But yeah, that is it. Shout out to Rudy for editing this video, and goodbye.